I failed once, not because I was evil, not because I was lazy, because in that world, weakness was a sentence, and I was born already condemned. My name was Kael Riven. In my first life, I was not a hero, a ranked fighter, a guild master, or one of those blessed players whose names appeared on golden system boards. I was a porter, the person who walked behind real hunters and carried whatever they were too important to touch. Broken swords, monster cores, empty potion bottles, dead men's bags, sometimes dead men themselves. When the gates first appeared, everyone called it a game, a Styrian gate, a miracle world where dungeons opened like doors, monsters dropped rewards, and ordinary people could become legends if the system chose them. Rich families bought starter weapons. Guild heirs bought private trainers. Saint houses bought blessings before their children even entered the first dungeon. People like me waited outside the gates and hoped someone needed cheap labor. Then, the logout button vanished. The sky cracked open with a red system warning, and the game became the only world left. No respawn, no reset, no second character. If you died in the Styrian gate, you died for real. That was when the strong became rulers, and the weak became equipment. Guilds stopped hiring porters by name. They numbered us. I was Porter 17, useful enough to carry supplies, too useless to protect. For 10 years, I survived by watching. I watched which smiling guild leaders abandoned injured members. I watched which cheap relics later became priceless. I watched which dungeons were safe only because the monsters were still sleeping. I watched nobles laugh at cursed items they were too privileged to understand. And I watched people die because they did not know the future until it arrived. The final dungeon opened in the 10th year. They called it the Godfall Labyrinth. Every guild believed clearing it would return the world to normal. I carried food for the heroes who entered it. I carried mana stones for the saints who blessed them. I carried replacement weapons for the knights who never looked at me. When the last escape gate appeared, there was room for 12. There were 13 of us. The strongest players argued over who deserved to live. No one argued for Porter 17. A sword pushed me back, not through hatred, not through anger, just convenience. The gate closed. The monsters came. And as I died beneath the broken stairs of the final dungeon, I remembered the one mistake I had made before all of this began. The Celestial Auction. The first auction ever opened above a Styrian gate. Back then, I had been hired to clean failed relics from the floor. Gods, nobles, guild masters, and dragon-blooded heirs filled the hall. I was invisible. That was why I saw what they missed. At the end of the auction, after the divine swords, dragon eggs, saint armor, and royal titles were sold, one item remained. A cracked black cube no bigger than a fist. The auction called it an empty storage relic, a failed inventory left behind by a god whose name had been erased. The dead god's inventory. Everyone laughed. A noble bought it for 1 copper as a joke. 3 days later, he vanished. 7 years later, I found his corpse inside a sealed dungeon vault, still holding the cube. That was when I learned the truth. The inventory was not empty. It was locked. It rejected gods because they already owned too much. It rejected nobles because inheritance clung to their blood. It rejected guild masters because the system recognized their property, titles, and blessings. The first slot could only open for someone with nothing. No class, no land, No divine blessing, no inheritance, no system-recognized worth. Someone like me. I learned that too late. I died knowing the key had been in my hands my entire life. Then I opened my eyes, and I was 19 again. The first thing I saw was a cracked ceiling. The second was a blue system window floating above my bed. Player registration incomplete. Class value, none. Asset value, none. Blessing value, none. Recommended role, porter. In my first life, those words had broken me. This time, they made me smile. Because the system had just confirmed the most important fact in the world. I still owned nothing. The celestial auction would open in 30 days. The dead god's inventory would be sold for 1 copper, and every powerful fool in a Styrian gate would ignore it again, unless I reached it first. I did not start by training like a hero. Heroes had teachers, weapons, healers, and time. I had memory, so I trained like a survivor. I ran the old sewer route beneath the southern gate because I knew the first dungeon panic would collapse the main bridge. I strengthened my fingers because porters died when they dropped rope. I learned to hold my breath for 3 minutes because the auction's trash chute passed through a flooded relic tunnel. I stole no gold. Gold would register as property. I accepted no blessing. Blessings would close the inventory. I refused 3 guild offers, even when hunger made my hands shake. A guild badge was worth more than a house in the system's eyes, and I needed the system to keep seeing me as worthless. On the 30th night, I put on the gray coat of an auction trash porter and entered the sky elevator beneath the city. It rose through clouds, stars, and old monster bones until the mortal world disappeared below. The celestial auction hall floated above the moon like a palace built from glass, gold, and arrogance. Every seat belonged to someone powerful. Gods wore human faces and smiled with too many eyes. Dragon heirs leaned on crystal spears. Guildmasters whispered over price sigils. Nobles wore rings worth more than the district where I was born. No one looked at the porter carrying broken relic crates. That was the privilege of being invisible. The auction began. A phoenix egg sold for 3 million gold. A saint's spear sold for a coastal kingdom. A sealed bloodline sold to a prince who would die from it in 6 years. I knew their futures. I knew which treasures would kill their owners. I knew which bargains would become wars. But I kept my eyes lowered. The item I wanted came last. The hall lights dimmed. A silver platform rose from the floor. On it rested the cracked black cube, the dead god's inventory. It did not glow like the other relics. It did not sing. It did not beg to be chosen. It looked dead. That was why everyone believed it was. The auction registrar, Lady Valeth Orisar, stepped forward in white-violet robes. Her voice carried through the hall like a blade sliding from silk. Final item, unopened divine inventory, previous owner erased, contents unverified. Appraisal result, empty. Laughter moved through the auction. Someone called it divine trash. Someone offered to use it as a wine weight. A god with golden antlers asked if the porter wanted it. The hall laughed harder. So I raised my hand. The laughter died slowly. Lady Valeth looked down at me for the first time. A porter cannot bid. I placed 1 copper on the marble floor. The coin looked pathetic in that hall. That was the point. Unclaimed trash may be purchased by disposal staff, I said. It was a rule no noble had ever needed to remember. Valeth's eyes narrowed. For 1 second, I saw fear behind her elegance. Not fear of me. Fear that I knew the rule. A guildmaster stood. Let the rat buy his toy. A prince smiled. If it kills him, at least the auction ends with entertainment. Lady Valeth waited. Maybe she hoped the system would reject me. Maybe she already knew it would not. The copper coin melted into the floor. A black-violet ring opened beneath my feet. The cube floated from the platform to my palm. It was heavier than a mountain, colder than death. The hall watched, amused. Then the cube cracked. One line of violet light opened across its surface. Then another. Then 100 golden inventory rings unfolded above my hand like the ribs of a dead star. Every god in the hall stopped smiling. A system window appeared without words, only symbols. An empty crown, a broken sword, a locked dungeon gate, a sealed monster eye, and one open slot. The first slot, the slot no god, noble, or guildmaster had ever reached. Inside it was not a weapon. It was a deed. A dungeon deed. Black parchment. Violet seal. Name hidden beneath broken divine ownership. But I knew the shape of that gate. I had seen it once before in my first life. The Morning Well. The dungeon that would open in 3 years. The dungeon that would kill millions. My knees failed. Not from fear, from the weight of understanding. The Morning Well had been called a natural disaster in my first life. A dungeon born beneath the western slums. It opened without warning. It swallowed children first, then families, then rescue guilds. For 6 months, every death inside produced rewards no one could claim, because no one owned the dungeon. Now the deed floated above my hand. The dead god had owned it before it was born. And because I owned the inventory, the system believed I owned the dungeon too. The auction hall erupted. Guildmasters shouted. Nobles demanded cancellation. A god reached toward me with 6 shining hands. The inventory responded first. Black-violet chains burst from the open slot and wrapped around the god's wrists. Not to hurt him, to remind him that he had no claim. Lady Valeth lifted one hand, and the hall froze under auction law. Her eyes never left the cube. "Porter," she said softly, "do you understand what you have purchased?" In my first life, I would have begged. This time, I bowed. I purchased trash. A few nobles laughed again, but weaker now. Valeth did not laugh. "No," she said, "you purchased unfinished ownership." The cube pulsed in my palm. For a moment, I saw deeper slots inside it. A sword made from a dead constellation, a dragon egg wrapped in chains, a crown with a heartbeat, a sealed army kneeling in darkness, and behind them all, a corpse larger than a kingdom. The dead god had not stored items. He had stored claims, things not fully owned, miracles not fully completed, dungeons not fully born, creatures not fully bound, kingdoms not fully lost. That was why the inventory killed its owners. They thought it was a treasure box. It was not. It was a grave full of arguments. And I had just become the weakest judge in creation. I left the auction before anyone could decide how to kill me legally. The sky elevator dropped me back into the mortal city before dawn. Below, a Styrian gate was still peaceful. The first dungeon break had not happened yet. Children slept in the western slums. Guilds still sold beginner swords. Players still joked about respawns. No one knew the logout button would vanish. I stood on a rooftop with the cube floating above my palm and the dungeon deed burning violet in the air. I could sell it. Every guild in the future would have paid kingdoms for it. I could become rich before the first monster crossed the gate. That was what the old Kael would have done. The dead Kael. Then I looked toward the western slums. In 3 years, that district would become a grave. I remembered the girl who fed me in winter. She died there. I remembered the healer who treated porters for free. He died there too. This time, I did not need to wait for the massacre. I owned the gate before it opened. So I used the first command. The cube unfolded into a circular inventory window, with the dungeon deed at its center. I placed both hands on the seal. "Redirect first rewards," I whispered. The system resisted. The deed cracked. The cube cut into my palms. A warning ring opened above the city, invisible to everyone but me. Ownership command accepted. Target: unranked survivors within Western slum boundary. Future reward stream redirected. Cost: owner liability activated. I laughed once, quietly, bitterly. Of course there was a cost. There was always a cost. By sunrise, every child in the western slums woke with a faint violet shield mark over their heart. No one understood it. Not yet. But when the first dungeon break came, that mark would keep them alive for one fatal second longer. And sometimes, 1 second was the difference between a corpse and a survivor. That was my first act of kindness in my second life. It was also my first act of ownership. The moment those marks appeared, the dead god's inventory changed me. My system status flickered. Porter disappeared. Owner appeared. Then another word formed beneath it. Contradiction. Across the city, hidden system bells began to ring. Not for the players, not for the guilds, for the things that corrected broken timelines. Lady Valeth watched from the moonlit auction hall above the clouds, her face pale beneath divine glass. "He opened the first slot," whispered her assistant. "No," Valeth said. Her eyes reflected the black-violet light spreading across the world. "He opened the wound." That night, the inventory woke me by itself. The cube floated above my chest, rotating silently. A new slot had unlocked. Inside it was a mask made of white bone and black glass. I had seen that mask once before, on the creature that killed me in the final dungeon. The system window opened above it. Previous owner, murdered. Cause of death, inventory breach. New owner detected. Correction hunters released. And far beyond the city, inside a dungeon that would not open for 10 years, something wearing my future death lifted its head. The game had noticed me. This time, it was not waiting for the end.